You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guest about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. When you speak with a self-declared customer experience and contact center geek, you know you're in for a treat. That's exactly how today's guest, Matt Beckwith, Director of Customer Experience for Clark Pest Control, shows his LinkedIn headline. What's that you say? You didn't realize that the pest control industry focused on customer experience? Well, the good ones do. It'll be good to hear more about that from Matt in the episode. Matt has this real heart for CX. This isn't just transactional analytics. It's getting at the emotions and the why behind what makes a great experience something special. If I asked you, can pest control saves lives? What would you think? I think we'll all be intrigued when Matt shares that story. Matt, welcome to CX Passport.
Right on, Rick. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Right on indeed. And just so that y'all know, Matt is sitting in California, I am sitting in Texas, and the right on gets us absolutely in the right vibe, taking us forward here. Awesome. Matt, in that intro, I mentioned your customer experience leadership for a large pest control provider, right? I think our listeners don't traditionally think of that area or even other home services as the real drivers of CX. Yet, I know you've helped raise my awareness on how it can be one of the most focused in that area. Let's just start by telling me a little bit about how you got into the space, and then help me understand your approach to CX there.
Yeah, absolutely, Rick. This is one of the things I love talking about because you're right. Most people will look twice when you talk about customer experience in the pest control business,
right?
Because it seems to be one of those things that people don't like to talk about, or it seems like a dirty job or those kinds of things. Well, thanks to Mike Rowe, dirty jobs are a cool thing. But my background, I've been in call centers. I think I was born into a call center, but I've been working in call centers for many, many years in telecommunications and banking and in healthcare and all these different industries. And I thought that, and some of those industries are not known for their customer experience, but obviously our job was to change that. And when I had the opportunity just about 8 years ago to come to Clark Pest Control, which I didn't know much about, and only as a consumer of pest control services. It wasn't until after that I realized pest control and home services has a completely different vantage point when it relates to connecting with customers, because in all my years in banking and healthcare and telecommunications, we didn't send people to people's homes. And in pest control and certainly and in home services, we're sending these men and women out in the field to proudly wear a uniform. They're going to your home, and oftentimes for some inspections, they're going to parts of your home you've never been to, right. Underneath your home.
Right.
So that requires a whole different level of customer empathy, customer understanding, customer engagement, and trying to support that from the contact center perspective, and then also using that to develop a customer experience program. But yeah, it's completely different than banking, because in banking, I always say that the worst thing you could do is take away somebody's money, which is not really money. It's numbers on a screen, right? And that's about it's pretty important numbers. Let's clear about that. But
the worst that you can do is take their money.
Well, you just give it right back.
Right.
But unless you wire it to the wrong place,
that's
I've been involved in those a couple of times. But in our industry, we send people to your home, and that just requires a complete different level of knowing a customer and making improvements based on their feedback.
Boy, I hadn't even really thought about that until you and I had gotten to talking. The fact that it's the physical presence in one of the most personal spaces that a customer has in their home. We talk about the human interaction that exists in a retail store. It's human to human. There's that interpersonal contact. There's a contact center if somebody calls in or emails in. That's human. But that idea of being there in the home, I'm curious how. This may be maybe this is a podcast in and of itself, but if you're talking about an army of men and women going out into these homes, how are you ensuring that they're equipped to be exactly what you just described? Not only technically proficient at pest control, but also empathetically proficient in engaging with the customer?
Well, I'll tell you, our organization, but also our industry is, we recognize, like in any other field, it's about hiring the right people and hiring for the right skills, right? You're hiring people that want to work out there in the field, that want to drive a truck, that also want to get get in front of customers sometimes. And that's a different skill set than just somebody that has a technical proficiency to apply a material to a property, right? And so starting from that, and in my several years here, we've had technicians in the field that have done incredibly well with a whole host of backgrounds that come to us from completely different fields than you would ever imagine. In fact, most of our technicians that start with us have never worked in the pest control space, which is great because then we can teach them the way that we want it done and how our customers demand it. But they come to us with not always even customer facing stuff, but if they come to us with that desire to want to serve a customer in the field out in the real world, then that's the first step.
That makes a lot of sense. And actually, I've got it's old at this point. I wrote this article 4 years ago, and I'm not even sure at this point, just called Hire Happy People. And it is exactly that sort of perspective of, hiring for heart, teaching for skills. And there's an extreme to that, right? I do not want my vaccine scientist to be hired for heart. I want them to be hired for skills. So there are extremes. The designer of the Boeing wing, yes, please hire them for skill. I don't care if they're a jerk. Just make sure they're great at the wing. Amen. We did kind of allude to the contact center side of it, right? I know we're talking about being in the home aspect of it, but that's another human-to-human interaction. And I know as a contact center geek, I love that. I think that may be how we originally kind of came to know each other, is triggering off of that. But I know you clearly have to spend a lot of time thinking about a contact center and what goes on in that space. And all I hear about right now is call reduction, deflection, digitization. Those aren't bad things. But there's a humanity element about it. And I'm curious, how do you think that just focus on digitization, call reduction, deflection influences customer experience?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Rick, because this is one of those things that in all of my years of running contact centers, it was all about call deflection. And that happens in the contact center space. I remember years and years ago, I've been in this industry long enough to remember when they said, we're going to put in an IVR, this new thing called IVR, and it's going to reduce your volume and you're going to save a ton of money because it's going to take care of the easy stuff. And sure, 25 years ago when I was at a credit card company, we didn't have an IVR and we stood one up. And once you identified, it gave you your balance and 20% of our calls went away. That's a no-brainer. But I think there's a, at least in the last 10 or so years, it seems to be that the focus is so much on that quote unquote optimization that we're not asking the customers what they want.
Right.
What they want. There's this, I feel pretty strongly that we should ignore generational cohorts. I think I'm Gen X. I think I'm Gen X, and my children are late. They're the oldest of the millennials, and I think any one individual customer is not the proxy for all your customers. I had a conversation with one of your recent guests, Elaine, very recently about this topic and how we need to look at our customers as individuals. I mean, sure, it's important to look at the aggregate, but we cannot paint with these broad brushstrokes. And if we look at forcing people into channels, the question that always comes up is you ask any contact center leader, most of them, you ask, what channel would your customers prefer? They're going to tell you what they would prefer. They'd say, oh, let's push it to self-service. But if you actually gave every customer the ability to pick the channel that they wanted, then that would be customer focused decisioning, as opposed to what oftentimes happens is the organization says, well, we're going to lead from the perspective of we want to reduce calls, we want to increase self-service and obviously increase the digital contact rate, but they don't ask the customer what they want, and that's I think unfortunate. Whereas our approach in my organization is let's do what the customer wants. If the customer wants to call, and voice volumes have continued to go up, now voice volumes are as a percentage lower than all contacts than they were last year or the previous year. But still, we give it to them, give customers every option and let them pick. And doing that from the customer perspective first, as opposed to the company, has proven that people still like to pick up the phone if there's somebody there that will answer it.
Well, and that's what you're saying in there is really the theme that certainly speaks to my heart, and that is, provide the channel that the customer wants. And it is not, and there's a business reality to this. Yes, a phone call is more expensive than somebody self-helping through a digital aspect of it. So there is a cost component, and I get that. So it's not, because sometimes those of us in the CX space, we speak in these idyllic terms of we should just do whatever the customer wants, and sometimes there's a cost component. But I sincerely believe that it's about understanding what the customer's ideal path is, and the customer will deflect, if you will, in their own mode, in their own ways, if you've provided them the way to obtain the information that they need in that path. And the example that came up in one of my earlier podcasts was, and I think it was Ido Bornstein-Cohen. I think that's who brought this up, but he said, "When's the last time you called to book a restaurant reservation?" Right. None of us purposely choose to pick up the phone and call a human to make a restaurant reservation. We tend to like our apps for doing that, or the restaurant's website for doing that. And so we've preferred digital. That immediately reduced the calls that are going into that restaurant, allowing the host or hostess to be able to focus on the customers there in that moment. But then when it comes to, by the time that I've picked up the phone and I'm calling a business, do not put on your hold recording, "Hey, did you know you could access our website for all sorts of information?" Yeah, I already tried your website. I went there. I couldn't find the information I needed. So that's why I'm calling you. And being aware of why the customer's calling and what the reason why they're reaching out to a human can help you, sure, develop a better deflection in the future. But it's really about understanding what that customer needs and allowing that not to be, how can I push the customer away? But rather, how can I embrace what the customer needs, provide it for them in the mode that they want? It's not deflection, it's customer experience at its core.
Yep, exactly.
I know we talked a little bit about the millennials and the seasoned approach. I guess, that some of us that have a more seasoned generation that we want to call, but you're saying that you don't see that as a generation thing. And I agree. Elaine talked about that from, there is no such thing as one ideal customer. But have you seen that to be the case? You being closer to the contact center, are you seeing these kind of generational divides, or is that something that we've kind of given a little bit too much urban legend to?
Well, I definitely think it's urban legend, and I sit on the steering committee for the Northern California Contact Center Association, which gives me great access to some fantastic contact center leaders here in Northern California. And one of the things, and this subject comes up from time to time, and when people say, their voice volume is way down this year and it's all digital, we always ask the question, is that because you force people down that path?
Right.
And time again, it doesn't matter if I'm talking with in my case, a private business or a public agency, because in our area, there's a lot of state of California and federal government, city and county call centers. And in all of those, if there's an easy way to call, there is no clean way of saying that, that you could just say, oh, if the customer is under a certain age, they're not going to call. If you make it easy for them to call, if that is a channel, then some people will. And look, clearly, and I have, my daughters and at some point my young grandchildren, they will go to their phone first. They will go to their phone first and say, is there an app or is there a service that can do this? But I don't know that that's because I don't think that it's simply because they don't want to call, because that generation has been taught to never make a phone call. I think we, as people that are providing customer service, especially, that we have created that path. We have said to millennials and millennials parents, don't call us, it's too hard to call. And if you were going to actually test this, then if every company had an actual phone number that somebody answered as soon as you called it, then my suspicion is, obviously it would cost more of an investment. But if you did that, if every company out there had a phone number and you called it and somebody actually answered when you called it within 10 seconds or so, I think more people would call, but it's the chicken and egg, right? Yeah. I think we are seeing people not wanting to call as much because we've made it so darn hard for people to call.
You're right. And there's so much truth in it. And it's like everything. There's no real binary answer to this. It's not all call or no call. Right. It's that middle solution that we were going to of what is the customer's preferred channel, providing them. Because, I mean, heck, I guess I'm Gen X. I am Gen X. Give me some Pearl Jam. Give me some 80s music. Give me some grunge. So I'm definitely Gen X. But I still, I do enjoy the call. But I think my first go-to is always digital. I would rather solve in a digital way. But if it's complex or if there's something beyond that mode, or what if I'm particularly concerned about the issue? Well, then I want a human there to help me resolve that. We're talking about kids, and I'm going to go just completely turn the corner here a little bit, but we are a travel podcast as well, talking about customer experience and travel. You and I have talked about traveling with kids, and there's something unique about their perspective when it comes to travel. What's that been like for you? And has that had any sort of influence on even your approach to customer experience?
Oh, it certainly has. And my kids are both of them are grown. Our oldest kid has blessed us with two wonderful grandchildren.
Hey, all right.
Our youngest daughter just graduated from college. They did our ceremony just the other night.
Oh, congratulations.
From San Jose State. Go Spartans.
Right.
But because of the pandemic, they delayed it. But so our kids have been out of the house for a number of years, but I look back at all the trips that we took with them and even with our grandchildren and we love to be a little bit off the beaten path and go not necessarily just down the path of where the tourists go. And we've always encouraged our kids to look at the local community and look at the people that are there. And I don't remember where exactly I learned it, but when I was very young, as a young parent, I think my wife and I might have went somewhere and then somebody said, "Oh, did you see this? And did you see this thing in this place there?" And I said, "No, this was before we had internet access." I said, "No, we went to this, the book said to go, these are the must-do places to visit when you're there." And I realized there's this place where people live. And if I go visit somewhere, I want to see where people live, because that's often where I found, as I've gotten older, the best bars, the best restaurants, the best karaoke joints are in the places where people live. And so we've always, taken our kids to see that. But we've also, my kids, I always said my kids know more about contact center. Neither one of them have ever worked in one, but they have heard me talking about it their entire lives. But they can equate when they visit a place and they think, they think about where the locals shop and where the locals dine and where the locals go for fun, that they can see the distinction between the experience that they get as a tourist in those spots versus the touristy spots, and just being able to appreciate where people actually live and work in those communities, I think has helped me understand. One of the things that I often remind folks in my organization is we're not the typical customer. Like, no one employee is a typical customer of your business. So we should never make decisions based on how we interact with our business. We should interact with our business, walk a mile in a customer's shoes, but we're not a typical customer. And same thing when I'm traveling with the kids, that we're a guest in these people's homes, and our one singular experience isn't that experience for everybody that visits there, and understand that their experience there is through the eyes of a local, not just as a tourist.
Man, that traveling with kids is so nice, Matt. Now, there are times though that it can be exhausting to travel with kids, and that is where the first class lounge can come in a little bit handy. So how about a little bit of change of pace here? Join me in that first class lounge and let's have a little fun here. What is a dream travel location from your past?
Oh, absolutely. My wife and I's favorite place in the entire world is on Maui, specifically the little town of Kihei. With the storms recently that just blew through all the Hawaiian Islands, Maui took a pretty big punch, and that part of Kihei did as well. But there's no place in the world like it. And again, there's lots of wonderful places to stay in Maui. I love Ka'anapali, but the little town of Kihei is just that is my paradise.
And it doesn't surprise me to hear you describe it as the little town. It's not the main towns. These aren't the big names that we're used to hearing, but the little town is a delight for you. I can totally see that. So going towards the future, what is a dream travel location you've not been to yet?
Well, my wife and I have already been talking because we've been cooped up for the last couple of years.
Amen.
But our next big trip, we want to go to London. And over the last probably decade and a half, I have been collecting reasons to go to London. And they just keep stacking up. And if I trace my family back just a few generations, I am 50% English. And so I've always wanted to go there. And maybe spend not just London, but to go throughout all of the UK, and that's probably going to be our next biggest trip.
Oh, that's going to be so much fun. I do love London. I've had the opportunity to be there a couple times, some for work, some for just for not for work, for play. What is a favorite thing to eat?
Well, I never ate sushi for many years, much to
Okay.
my wife's chagrin.
Hmm.
But several years ago, on a work trip with a coworker, um, I finally got turned on to sushi. So now my wife loves the fact that anywhere we go, I
Nice.
want sushi. And the sushi here in California is amazing.
Sure.
I have had sushi in the Midwest and other parts that is good, but nothing like here.
Yeah.
And all of that doesn't compare to the sushi at anywhere on Maui. But generally, if I'm traveling somewhere, I want to find the best sushi place.
Nice. Oh, sounds great. Well, I want to ask you the other question though. What is a thing your parents forced you to eat but you hated as a kid?
Man, liver and onions. And
Oh.
I can still
Oh.
I can still snap my finger and go back to being, I must have been 9 or 10, and I have an identical twin brother, and we both remember this very well, sitting at the table and not being allowed to excuse ourselves until we made it through that liver and onions one time. And I promised that I would never make
Yeah.
my children, never force them to eat anything. Now, ironically, both of my children and my wife they're all vegetarians. So I tell them the story and they are aghast. But
Yeah.
yeah, even just the hearing the word liver scares me.
I'm a solid carnivore. I guess omnivore, but I like my meat. Liver and onions, no. I just don't even understand how that's a dish. For those of my listeners that are from Texas, they'll know this chain, Luby's Cafeteria. And it seemed like my mom would always get the liver and onions at Luby's. And I just had no idea why that was even an entree. Just, I'm with you, Matt. What is one travel item, not including your phone, that you will not leave home without?
Not my phone. Yeah, the vacation, as many people say, would be to leave your phone.
Yeah, well,
That's
true.
the vacation.
Yeah.
I'm an analog guy. I do have a phone, and I'm not a Luddite. I like technology, but I don't go anywhere without a paper notebook. So my one thing would be a two thing. It'd be I if I travel, I have a notebook and a pen.
Matt, I've known people that they're doodlers like that, and it just amazes me. In fact, there was one guy that I worked with at Capital One the years ago. When he took notes, he never wrote any letters. It was always through pictures, and it was the most creative and almost inspiring. He was very much on the design side of
Yeah.
spectrum of thinking, and so those of you that walk around with a notepad and a pen, I admire what you're doing. I've waited long enough. You told me that pest control saves lives. How does pest control save lives?
Well, I can tell you that, in my experience working in this industry, I have come across some of the greatest customer stories that I've ever heard of or experienced in my entire life. And we could spend hours and hours and hours and not even scratch the surface. But not that long ago, I think in the beginning of 2021, we heard about a customer wrote in to tell us that one of our field supervisors went to a woman's home to do a quality assurance inspection. So after some number of inspections, or treatments, a supervisor will go out and just make sure that the service was done
Yeah.
okay. And he knocked on the door, and there was no answer, but he thought something just didn't seem right. And there was the dog was out in the back, and he'd been there a couple of times to know the dog isn't usually out in the back. And so he knocked again, put his ear to the door, and he could hear a faint voice. Um,
Oh.
and he suspected something might be wrong. So he tried to open the door. The door was locked. He went and got a neighbor. The neighbor knew the phone number of I think the woman's adult children,
Mm.
and they called, and they lived nearby and came by, and they were able to get in the door really quick. And the woman, our customer, had suffered a stroke
Oh.
just maybe several hours before, and she was halfway between where it had happened and the door, and she couldn't get to a phone, and so they had emergency personnel
Oh.
called and showed up and took her to the hospital, and she recovered fine, and is and those kinds of stories that we come across because we are out in the field, we are at people's
Yeah.
homes, we are on people's property, and we see things, and we don't just we don't incentivize just doing a quick service and leaving. We incentivize and build an experience where they should get to know their customers, and those kinds of things leads to these. And there's been so many of these, but that one recently really just touched me, that was able
Gosh.
to help that customer.
No, and I've got to imagine one, that story just catches me because there's so many elements of just classic customer experience in there that are one. Hey, this person actually did save a life. Awesome. I mean, that's just amazing in and of itself. We could end right there. But the fact that you said, hey, he heard the dog in the backyard and realized that's something that's odd. That's someone that's not going out there and doing just the job. I'm here to lay down some pest control and leave, but rather is understanding their customer, understanding their customer's environment, and understanding that. I've got to imagine that story has some particular impact inside of the company. And I think about that when I think about hearts and minds and that sort of thing. How are you, especially in a contact center, sometimes that can get pretty sterile or even transactional. How do you keep that story alive and that heart of the customer alive in the hearts and minds of your contact center, of your company, and as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, and one of my favorite parts of my job is, and I have an unofficial title, meaning nobody's ever going to call me this except for me, but it reminds me of the importance of it, is that I am the chief storyteller. And I love being the chief storyteller because my part of the organization is responsible for managing our voice of the customer programs, as well as the customer experience and the contact centers. We hear a lot of this, but we also are the ones that share it. And we have a lot of stories like this where when we hear about it, the technician in the field says, I don't want to make a big deal of it. I was just doing my job. We hear that all the time. I was just doing my job. And then I'm the one that says, look, we're going to share this. And I have shared so many stories. Usually every couple of years I go out and do a road show with a bunch of other leaders from our corporate office. And we visit every branch. We get in front of every single employee. And I do that because I want to tell stories, but also I want to hear stories. And we share these stories. I mean, I can't imagine that we would go an entire week without me sending something to the contact center or to the senior leadership team about some story we heard. And those stories, and these stories are not, the most amazing thing, Rick, is they're not specific to my company. They are specific to my industry. The pest control industry is unlike anything I have ever experienced. Every single person I've ever met in this industry, anywhere in North America, shares these exact same kind of stories. And maybe it's the reason I've been here longer than at any other job, but it is heartwarming that we have created an environment where we can connect with customers as a human to human, as Jenny Dempsey likes to say, people helping people. And that's, that gives me great pleasure to continue to move these stories throughout the organization.
I like that. I was just doing my job. I didn't even think much of the story. Those are the phrases that we've heard. I still remember really impactful stories being told at Capital One's home equity division. Home equity. It's a financial transaction. But when you see, and they would send out film crews and interview a customer when it was a particularly a special story. When you hear a parent say, I was able to adopt a 14-year-old girl into our family. When you hear someone say, I was able to get this experimental cancer treatment because of this product. You think of a sterile home equity product, it's financial, but that storytelling and being able to provide those stories connected, I was an employee, so I'm not speaking here hypothetically, connected me to the brand, made me feel special about what I was doing. And as the tears rolled down my face, realizing I'm at the right place doing the right thing. Matt, I'd love it if you would close out. There's another story that you've shared with me, and it's that same kind of, who would have thought that a company could have this kind of an impact on customers? And there's and this will date it a little bit, but you've told me from something from your pager world. And I'd like just to close out with this story because this one warms my heart and I'd like our listeners to hear it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Rick. It's many, many years ago. I used to tell people my first contact center job was a 411 operator. But after I left the phone company, I went to work for a quote unquote wireless, but wireless didn't mean cell phones back then. They meant pagers, beepers. Right. And many, many years ago, so this was going back to the mid 90s, I worked for a company in the contact center for a paging company, local paging company. And a woman came to the lobby and had an interaction with our lobby representative. And then come to find out that she wanted to let us know that her husband, our customer, had passed away suddenly just a little time before that. And of course, everybody and this I think was a customer with maybe one pager, just not a like a big corporate account, just a consumer. And everybody offered condolences and asked if there's anything we could do. And she said that, yeah, there was something that she was really hoping that we could get the recording of his voicemail greeting and some of his voicemails, because she knew that he would sometimes leave himself voicemails of like reminders of things. And she knew that, and it had been a week or maybe a couple of weeks after he had passed. And she asked, is there any way we can get this? And we didn't have the technology, but this was mid '90s. We call recording was not what it is today. And so I remember, asking her to, leave her name and number, and we would find out. And that became our priority that day. And I remember going to our head of technology and said, I don't know how to do this. I was a new supervisor in the contact center. I don't know how to do this, but we have got to do something. Yeah. And he brought me into the switch room. We were also a local telephone company. So he brought me into the switch room and he showed me, I'll never forget, because he showed me what voicemail looks like and like the actual server rack box of voicemail. And then he logged into this terminal there, and he took out an old school tape recorder and an actual cassette tape. Yeah. And he recorded a tape that had her late husband's greeting and all of his voicemail messages. And we didn't go through, the privacy thing to make sure. Look, this woman gave us all the information we needed to be able to look it up, and we just recorded it. And a couple of hours time, called her, she came back, and we made that woman's day, or probably more than that, because she was able to get this recording of his greeting. And I remember listening to the greeting as we were recording it, and I remember being struck that person was no longer with us. That customer had passed on. Mm-hmm. And I just remember, I didn't know the customer, but his voice was real. His voice was human. His voice was fun. And I kept thinking of that wife and thinking, she's now going to have this recording. And I can't believe this has been that many years. But that sort of thing. And we were all speechless, but after, I think, several months, we started telling everybody in the company about that. And everybody was like, oh, same thing you said about the boring, sterile, home equity product, that people realized we had more than just a beeper and a phone number.
Matt, what a great story to end with. I know that person clearly was warmed by it, and what all of those of us that have lost someone in our lives know how meaningful that would be. And for you and the team and the contact center and everyone else to just be able to surround that customer with the care and feeding, to be able to provide that for her. So beautiful. Let's just close with that. I will say, Matt, beautiful story. I've enjoyed hearing your stories, the storytelling, your insights as the contact center geek. How can people, if they want to learn a little bit more about you and a contact center geek, how should people get in touch with you?
Well, probably the easiest way to find me, if you can't remember, is contactcentergeek.com.
Okay.
That's the easiest way, or mattbeckwith.com, but either one of those will get you to me. I'm on LinkedIn and love connecting with people and learning about new industries and new things on LinkedIn, and on Twitter as well at Matt. I can't even get my name right. Matt Beckwith. If you go to contactcentergeek.com, all the links are there.
Great. And I'll make sure all of that gets into the show notes. So nobody, unless you've got your notepad and your pen like Matt does in his first class lounge, you can go to the show notes and you'll have that information there. Matt, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing those stories. Thank you for sharing your insight. I came away not only with having learned something, but my heart a little warmer as a result. Thank you so much.
Awesome, Rick. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. Make sure to visit our website, cxpassport.com, where you can hit subscribe so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, you can check out the rest of the EX4CX website. If you're looking to get real about customer experience, EX4CX is available to help you increase revenue by starting to listen to your customers and create great experiences for every customer every time. Thanks for listening to CX Passport, and be sure to tune in for our next episode. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.